In this video, we're going to talk about how to facilitate some of the more challenging skills when you're working with children with special needs. Now, the very first skill that we always work on is blowing bubbles. We really want our children to learn how to submerge into the water without getting water down their throat. So we always start with bubbles, right? The problem we sometimes run into is that our children with special needs might have some difficulty with motor planning. That's the ability to imitate a novel motor action. So although we're showing them how to blow on the bubbles on the surface of the water, that might be a hard skill for them to actually imitate. So what are we going to do? The first thing I like to do is an exaggerated blow. So I start kind of close to them so they can feel it, and I say, and then as I'm going down, I sink underwater. So they feel the air, and then they see the air hit the surface of the water, and then they see the bubbles once my mouth goes into the water. So it very clearly shows them how I'm creating those bubbles. And I do it very slowly and exaggerated. Sometimes I'll even take their hand and I'll go, so that they can feel the air on their hand and then the bubbles that it creates when we go under the water. So step number one, slow and exaggerated, starting on top of the water, going to the surface of the water, then going under the water. The next thing I like to show them is that it's similar to blowing bubbles like with a bubble wand or blowing bubbles with a straw. Now, the first time I tried to teach this, I brought a straw into the pool and I showed them blowing bubbles, and guess what happened? They tried to drink the water. So I do not suggest using straws for this. But you can find these things. They're called bubble pipes. They're little plastic guys that are like a U shape. They look like a pipe, and you are supposed to dip them into bubbles and then blow the bubbles. But what I do is I put my mouth on it and I show them again above the water and then going under the water, me blowing. And then when my mouth goes into the water, the bubbles come out from the pipe. And something about this makes it more accessible to them. They may already understand how to blow for creating bubbles. And then they also have that tactile object that they can put into their mouth. They can bite down on it. They can feel it. They can squeeze their lips around it. And it helps them to learn that mouth position that they have to be able to assume in order to blow those bubbles. Another thing to keep in mind is that some kids may never learn to blow bubbles, and that's actually okay. Although I love blowing bubbles, it feels so calming to me. For a child with special needs, they might not learn that skill. What we really want them to learn is how to keep water out of their oral cavity, or how to keep water from going down. And another way that you can do that besides just blowing bubbles is to teach them to get a tight seal with their lips. The way I do this is by giving them an exaggerated mmm. So it's the same strategy where you start above the water, move very slowly to the surface of the water and then under the water, and I go mmm, and then try to get them to imitate it. Again, sometimes I put their hand on my mouth. They can feel that kind of vibration that's coming off of my vocal cords onto their hand, and it helps them to understand what's happening. So oftentimes we'll work on that tight lip closure rather than trying to get them to blow bubbles. And finally, sometimes they don't learn the tight lip closure and they may always enter into the water with their mouth open. In that case, we want to teach them how to close off their airway and spit the water out when they come back up. So in that case, I teach them how to blow the water out, like come back up and kind of spit it out like a fountain, so that they start to learn how to expel it when it gets into their oral cavity. Now, another thing that is commonly difficult for our kids is submerging their face. They're very nervous about that. I think all kids get nervous about that skill, but for my kids with special needs, it takes them a lot longer to get comfortable enough that they're going to go underwater fully. And my number one tip for you is to please never push them underwater. I know that sometimes even a parent might be encouraging you to do that because you just want to show them like it's gonna be okay. But the worst thing you can do is break trust with them by pushing them underwater. Just because you're bigger and stronger than them does not give you the right to control their body in that way. So instead, what do? We spend a lot of time splashing and having fun and getting the water on our face and making it into a fun experience. And then I do a lot of jumping up and down and twirling them around and just getting them closer and closer to submersion until they're willingly going under the water and having that experience. So please don't push their faces into the water, but let them find that on their own. One final skill that is so challenging to teach is floating, especially the back float. So the front float is hard because they don't want to submerge their face. And oftentimes with my kids with special needs, I skip this skill completely because by the time they are comfortable putting their face in the water, I could have worked on a million other things. Eventually that will come and that will help them get into that better position. But in the meantime, we can work on propulsion even if their face is out of the water. But we definitely want to teach them a back float because it's a safety position. If you fall in unexpectedly and you can't quite get to the side of the pool, you can always flip over and rest on your back and wait for help. So it is an important skill to teach, but it's scary for our kids. They don't like going backwards and they also don't like getting their ears in the water. So we need to take it very slowly. Just like with all of the skills, we need to understand this is going to take more repetition in order to achieve it. And also we're going to have to break it down into these tiny little bits and pieces so they can learn this bit and then this bit and then this bit and eventually get all the way into doing a back float. So the first way that I like to teach them a back float is just to use a cradle position. So where I'm cradling them in my arms and I'm kind of swirling them back and forth and spinning them around so they start to get comfortable having their head back and having water splash onto their ears. From there, I'm going to put their head onto my shoulder. I'm going to put the back of their head on my shoulder, my hand underneath their torso, and I'm going to keep their ears out of the water completely. And I'm going to gently move them around and pull them back so the buoyancy of the water can help. And I'm going to sing a song to them. And I'm going to help them get used to being in that back float position, but fully supported and with their ears out of the water. The next step is going to be to slowly reduce your support. So that might mean slowly lowering your shoulders so that their head's in the water, then the ears are barely in the water, then eventually they're fully submerged, or bringing their head to the front so it's more resting on your chest, and then you're slowly bringing them down. It might also mean reducing the amount of support that you're giving them on their back. For our kids, if every single time we put them in this position, we give them a full support, and then one day we just try to take our hands away, they're not going to make that transition well. So instead, what I like to do is what I call popcorn handling. And popcorn handling is where instead of giving them a firm pressure on their back, I'm going pop, 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 pop. So I can still give them as much support as they need. So maybe I'm doing really fast pops if they need a lot of support, or I can slow it down and I can start to let them feel the buoyancy of the water and feel what it's like to be in the water without my support. And by using that popcorn handling with them, they can bridge that gap between being fully supported to being able to do it by themselves. So in summary, when you're working with a child who is struggling with achieving some of these skills, you want to take it slow, lots of repetition, try to exaggerate and slow it down and break it into small, tiny steps that they can accomplish. Good luck, and I'll see you in the next video.